In a remote forest, a man named Ray, a hunter living in Washington's Lake Mountains, dragged a dead deer to an open area. He used a small knife to cut the deer's belly, exposing fresh meat. Amidst falling heavy snow, adding a mysterious aura to the grim scene, Ray was fulfilling a rancher's request to eliminate wild animals threatening the ranch. Due to the rising coyote population, lacking natural predators, Ray's task was to either kill some female coyotes or chase away the males to prevent mating. Deep in the woods was a cabin, Ray's destination, where he planned to stay until the breeding season ended. Satisfied with this shelter, Ray noticed deer fur under the cabin's deck and a body nearby. Approaching, he found a young deer killed by coyotes, left uneaten, likely to be returned to when they were hungry. Ray decided to use the deer as bait to lure other coyotes. He loaded the deer onto a sled and headed towards a mountain peak, knowing the coyotes' active spots. Soon, he reached a small valley, a favorite spot for coyotes, where he could watch from a higher vantage point. After studying the terrain, Ray dragged the deer to the valley's bottom and opened its entrails, spreading the scent to attract nearby coyotes, knowing this would take some time. While Ray set up traps nearby, according to Washington state laws, wolf hunting is only permitted using live traps, not snares. This is because if a protected animal is accidentally caught, it can be released unharmed. The trap was ready-made and only needed assembling. Ray covered the ground with hay to hide the presence of wire nets. He then gathered branches and wood to fully conceal the trap, making it look very natural. The success of the trap depended on the bait. Ray took out a snowshoe hare, smeared its blood on the ground to spread the scent, and then threw the rabbit deep into the cage. However, because coyotes are cunning and smart, any inconsistency could arouse suspicion. Ray sprayed a special perfume made of fish oil, wolf urine, and skunk fluid at the entrance to mask human odors and create the illusion that other animals had been there, confusing the coyote. But that was not all. To attract the prey, he needed a visual impact. He tied a CD to a tree with fishing line so that when sunlight hit, the CD would reflect light and attract distant coyotes' attention. Now, he could leave. Before it got dark, he set another trap and waited for evening when coyotes began to be active. Ray had already set 2 traps and now headed towards the bait. To avoid startling the wildlife, he slowed down and kept quiet. Before long, he reached a high point with a natural barrier and looked towards the bait. There was no movement on the path yet, but a hunter's basic quality is patience, along with some techniques. He took out a whistle and started mimicking the cries of a dying animal. This mournful tune sounded particularly eerie in the silent wilderness, but was enticing to predators. They would hurry over, but after waiting a while with no targets appearing, Ray felt discouraged. Today might yield nothing. Just as he was about to give up, a figure flashed by. Ray quickly grabbed his rifle, and sure enough, it was a coyote. He decisively fired and hit the target. Ray did not act rashly, but waited until it was completely dark before stopping his watch and running towards the target. There lay a coyote on the snow, already stiff from the cold. He dragged the coyote back to the cabin, marking a good start to the day. Running a ranch is not an easy task. Tagging an unruly calf requires the effort of at least 2 strong men. This is the Granite Mountains in Nevada, located 400 miles south of the Sawtooth Mountains. Here Dusty, the father of Harry and Gideon, runs his ranch with about 50 cattle. However, due to workers leaving this year, he is left alone and calls his sons for help. This area is a high desert, filled with depressions and alkali soil, and has relatively dense vegetation, making it ideal for cattle grazing. The land is owned by the government and can only be leased by ranchers. To distinguish their property, each cow must be branded. During the summer, the cattle graze freely in the mountains and the newborn calves are unbranded. They need to find the calves quickly before the government does, otherwise Dusty could lose thousands of dollars. Led by several sheepdogs, they finally locate the herd. After a brief rest, they start a grand chase. The sheepdogs lead the charge towards the cattle, causing them to panic and run. The men spread out and continuously correct the direction of the herd, using tactics similar to those of wolves, which divide and conquer during hunts. The cattle can only run along a predetermined route until they finally return to the ranch. The men block the gate and start counting. There are 42 cattle, 2 are missing. So Harry and Gideon head back to the mountains to look for the lost cattle. Although there are no tall trees, the terrain is complex and bushy, making it difficult to spot hidden cattle. Harry uses binoculars and is lucky to spot the target. They immediately chase after and calm the calves by shouting. As they get closer, they find the mother cow is also nearby and joyfully drive both cattle back to the ranch. But the work is not over. They heat an iron in the fire and start selecting their targets, while their elderly father adds wood to the fire. Calves are generally branded at the age of 5 months, a mark that lasts forever. The two men position themselves separately and release any cows that do not meet the criteria. After counting, 6 calves need to be branded today. Now there are fewer cattle in the pen. Gideon seals the gate to ensure there are no issues before they begin their work. Harry took the lead, quickly lassoing the neck of the calf. However, this young black calf was stubborn by nature. Even as it foamed at the mouth from the lasso's pressure, it refused to submit. Seeing this, Gideon skillfully captured the calf's hind legs. Dusty approached immediately with the branding iron. They held the calf down and forcefully branded it, causing a puff of white smoke to rise, accompanied by the smell of burning. The calf bolted away as soon as it was released. They continued this process with the other calves, marking each one in the same manner. It was only after branding that these calves truly became their property. After a busy period, only 1 calf was left. Harry and Gideon's teamwork improved, making it easy to catch and subdue this last calf, rewarding it with a brand. The long day finally ended. The next day, as the sun rose, they started a new round of work. Yesterday, they had retrieved 44 cattle, but at least 6 were still deep in the mountains. Their task today was to find these remaining cattle. The terrain was steep and icy, so they replaced their horses' shoes with special iron shoes for better traction, much like fitting snow tires on a vehicle. Harry checked the size and found it perfect. After fitting the shoes, the horse showed no discomfort, and they set off prepared. Due to the long distance, they drove to the base of the mountain and then mounted their horses from the trailer without delay. The mountain roads were rugged and the horses could fall at any moment, but thankfully, the sharp-studded shoes prevented accidents. Unfortunately, as they advanced, the mountain roads became steeper, and they still couldn't see any cattle. Just as they were growing anxious, they finally spotted cattle hoof prints on the ground. Following the prints, they quickly caught up and soon saw several cattle among the mountain rocks. The sheepdogs immediately went to work. They were well trained to cooperate with their owners and harass the cattle, guiding them in the right direction. Because the mountain was full of rocks, the horses couldn't speed up, so the sheepdogs were the main force in herding the cattle today. However, the cattle were notoriously temperamental and resisted from time to time. After a continuous tug of war, they gradually moved down the mountain and eventually reached the trailer, successfully driving the cattle into the pen. The two men then proceeded to brand the remaining calves. This round of work was successfully completed, and they could return home. A tall tree fell straight down in the direction of the roar of the chainsaw. The tree was cut down because it was in the wrong place, too close to the homestead. This is the remote area of Iligolik Lake where Aran and Jenny have settled. Today, with clear weather, they aim to clear the surrounding hazards. Nearby dead trees, often called widowmakers, are risky because they can fall during the fierce winter winds. It is safest to cut them down. Now, 2 more dead trees need to be cut. They controlled the direction, safely bringing down the trees. Only 1 tree remains. Suddenly, the weather changed, and a blizzard could hit at any moment. The last tree was the most challenging as it was right next to the house. A poor direction could destroy the house, and solar panels in the other direction were also at risk. After strategizing due to a short cable, they used a pulley system connecting the tree and a jeep with a stump. As the wind picked up, they just finished setting up the system. With the jeep started, the cable tightened. Aaron immediately started the chainsaw, cutting a triangular notch on one side of the tree, then cutting straight and slightly higher on the backside. The tree's base became unstable, and it began to sway significantly. Aaron quickly signaled, and the jeep kept backing up. Together, they brought the tree down, narrowly missing the eaves. They sighed in relief. Aaron inspected the trunk and found several pine beetles, explaining why the pine had died. This pest, known as the pine tree's nemesis, feeds on the tree's bark and can kill the tree within a year. Now that the hazard was resolved, they could rest easy. in Montana's Bison River Valley. Today was the last day of deer hunting season, but only ancient weapons were allowed. Tom held an old-fashioned Horton rifle, once commonly used by mountain men. Although it only fires once, its power is sufficient to kill a bison. Sean and Hank also joined this operation, a form of tradition. Tom explained the rifle's performance to Hank, pouring some black powder from a storage antler into the barrel, then pushing a lead ball in with a tool, and finally compressing the ball onto the powder with a long stick. The bullet was now ready. Tom tested it with a stand, aimed, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot broke the silence. Tom used a telescope to confirm the hit on the target. The rifle was functioning well, and they set off in the car. After a while, they arrived at the Kootenai Forest. The weather was clear today, perfect for hunting. Tom and Sean each carried a rifle and entered the forest, filled with anticipation. Nothing beats the pleasure of fresh deer meat in winter. For this hunt, Sean had previously scouted the area and set up a blind. They just needed to hide inside and wait quietly for deer to appear. Deer are very alert animals with keen senses of smell, vision, and hearing. Any slight disturbance could startle them. Tom shared tips with Hank, such as turning your head slowly and maintaining a stealthy demeanor to confuse the prey. Patience, he explained, was crucial, sometimes requiring sitting quietly for hours. This approach soon paid off when a deer appeared in their sight. It was unaware of the danger and was focused on eating. Although they saw the deer, they did not shoot because the regulations only allowed hunting bucks at this time, and the deer was a doe. They watched regretfully as it walked away, followed by a long wait of 3 hours without seeing a buck. At this point, they decided to change strategy. Tom stayed put while Sean and his son went out to possibly drive a deer to him. Tom could see a doe lying in the snow, which might attract a buck. Meanwhile, Sean and his son reached another area, sat down beside a large tree, and started clashing antlers together. This mimicked the sound of bucks fighting, a tactic used to exploit the buck's jealousy to win over a doe. If there were any bucks in the area, they would come running towards the sound, enraged. Soon after, a young buck appeared. Sean observed carefully and returned to camp to tell Tom the good news. Tom quickly manipulated the antlers, sending out a rapid, intense sound. The buck followed the sound. They held their breath, waiting for the buck to move into a favorable position. The opportunity was brief. Seeing the buck pause, Tom took his shot decisively. Unfortunately, the buck did not fall, but walked away with small, hurried steps, leaving 3 men looking at each other in confusion. They went to check, and found no blood in the snow but a clear bullet mark on a nearby tree trunk. Perhaps it was fate. The buck's life was not meant to end. As it was getting late, they decided to end the hunt. Although the result was not ideal, enjoying the process was also a significant part of hunting's allure. This woman is stronger than a bichon. She is fishing, and in the water, a large fish is struggling desperately. Despite its wild efforts, the woman firmly controls it and eventually scoops it up with a net. It's a tasty lake trout. While Jenny is happy, her thoughts drift to her husband, Aaron. It was a dim morning when Aaron started preparing to go hunting in the mountains to stock up on food for the winter. The couple lives by Lake Iliamna in the north, relying entirely on nature for food. Today, Aaron's target is a moose, which lives in the marshlands. Moose are large, averaging over 1,000 pounds, and can yield about 500 pounds of meat, enough to sustain a family through the long winter. However, moose are notoriously difficult to catch. 3 miles from his home, there's an open meadow, a known moose haunt. Moose have poor eyesight but excellent hearing, able to detect sounds from 2 miles away. After patrolling, Aaron finds some moose droppings, which boosts his morale. He advances to a higher ground and uses his rifle scope to scan the meadow for moose. Unfortunately, he finds none. Aaron decides to use a seductive tactic. He mimics the call of a female moose during the mating season. This enticing sound could make a male moose think it's his lucky day. Aaron just needs to stay put, and the male moose will come right to him. He now holds a horn made from birch bark, producing a deep, long sound. Now, it's a waiting game. While her husband is busy hunting, Jenny is also productive. Since hunting involves luck and one shouldn't put all eggs in one basket, Jenny turns to fishing for food. The lake is their treasure, teeming with fish, with lake trout being a staple. In summer, although they rely on the lake, fishing is restricted to 3 fish per day as food. It doesn't take long for Jenny to complete today's task. She prepares to smoke the fish meat using red lacquer tree trunks, which emit a special smoke when burned, giving the smoked meat a delicious aroma. Jenny chops the trunks into pieces to help her smolder them while maintaining low heat to avoid cooking the meat directly. Then, she sprinkles some salt on the fish meat, places it in the smoker, and smokes it for about 5 hours. Meanwhile, Aaron was still on his hunting trip. He found many signs of moose activity, but still saw no moose. As time ticked away, he felt uncertain. Once again, he mimicked the call of a moose, hoping for a response. He scanned the meadow again, and finally, a figure appeared. Aaron watched intently, but felt a pang of heartache. Although it was a male moose, it was too far away. He needed it to be within 200 yards to shoot. He mimicked the call of a female moose again, trying to lure it closer, but the moose ignored the call and slowly walked away, leaving Aaron disheartened as the sky darkened. It seemed his moose hunting plan had to be abandoned, but he would not return empty-handed. He walked into the forest and quickly found a target, a ptarmigan, dazed on a tree. A bullet ended its reverie. Though it was pitiful, it was not lonely, as a second ptarmigan was also killed by Aaron. It seemed as if they were in love, and now they were together in fate. Satisfied, Aaron headed home. In the Blue Ridge Mountains, Eustace leads a self-sufficient life, but still needs to buy some essentials. The fresh hay is for the horses' winter food, stored in the barn for use when it snows. Here, neighbors help each other. Today, it was Eustace's turn to repay a favor. He decided the best way was through sharing knowledge. For years, his neighbor James had been asking how to train horses, a priceless skill that Eustace hesitated to teach. James runs a small farm with 3 stallions. His children are eager to train the horses, hence his interest. Eustace delayed because James's horses are stallions, a challenging and unpredictable task despite his decades of experience. Eustace carefully approached, placed the harness on the horse, and the process went smoothly. He began explaining basics, such as horses dislike anything that covers their eyes and training should be gradual. Through simple commands, the horse would learn who is in charge. Seeing the horse comply, they prepared for the next lesson. Just outside, the brown horse suddenly screamed as if startled, trying to break free. At that critical moment, a dog rushed up, barked fiercely, and calmed the horse quickly. Eustace advised his neighbor to take it slow. This incident didn't deter James, who continued with the remaining lessons, and the brown horse became increasingly obedient. Now, they were ready to move on to the next step. The two saddled the horse without any reaction from it, indicating a smooth process. However, for safety, they continued to walk the horse around before riding. A foundation of trust had been established, and the crucial moment followed. Eustace stepped into the stirrup and, after a few tries, smoothly mounted the horse. Fortunately, the horse did not struggle, making for a smooth start. Then, James instructed him to slowly back up, but the brown horse seemed nervous, so they stopped and switched to moving forward instead. The horse performed exceptionally well. Given its obedience, James let go of the reins, allowing Eustace to ride alone. Following commands, the horse could back up, move forward, and circle, all completed in a docile manner. Achieving this level in one day not only demonstrated Eustace's expertise, but also the horse's quality. The next day, they continued with training exercises. After fully equipping the horse, they brought it to the training ground, walked it around to familiarize it with the new gear, then attached a sled and continued walking. Once it adapted to the pace, Eustace stepped onto the sled, marking the end of the training. The brown horse graduated with perfect marks and would spend its life alternating between carrying people and pulling carts, becoming a proud working horse. This was a trap for catching wolves, using a small white rabbit as bait. Ray, a bounty hunter, was assigned to guard a ranch. He set up 2 traps and shot a coyote. 2 weeks had passed since that day in the Washington Cascades. As winter deepened and temperatures fell below freezing, food became scarce, prompting coyotes to continually harass the ranch. Therefore, Ray patrolled daily. As usual, he first checked the traps, but found nothing, not even the bait. Not giving up, Ray searched around. Local laws prohibited the use of lethal traps for hunting, allowing only live traps like cages, which are much harder to use. After 2 weeks, he hadn't caught anything. Upon inspection, Ray found that the cold weather had frozen the trigger mechanism. After fixing it, he tested the trap again, and this time it successfully closed. Ray smiled, ready to fetch a new bait. As night fell, Predators began to roam. Ray had finished repairing the traps and was ready to take proactive measures. He found a fresh coyote track and followed it slowly to avoid startling anything, staying vigilant and listening carefully. Soon he spotted a target, crouched down, and aimed. The coyote had not sensed the threat. Ray decisively fired his gun, shattering the silence. He quickly ran to the spot where the coyote had been standing, but it was empty. The coyote had run off in that direction. Ray decided to follow and soon found the coyote, which had stopped breathing. He stroked its soft fur, hoping its spirit would return to nature. Checking its gender, he discovered it was female, which pleased him since hunting female coyotes helps control their population. Ray carried the coyote back, humming a tune as he returned to his cabin. The next day, with the sun shining, he set out to fix the cabin. When he first arrived, he noticed deer fur under the deck, a clear sign they used it as a warm den. The presence of deer would attract coyotes, so Ray decided to seal off this area to prevent future issues. He used a drill to connect 2 wooden boards, then nailed them to the cabin's frame. Using the same method, he installed 2 beams and then moved on to attaching the panels. With the whirring of the drill, he secured the aluminum panels to the beams. Before long, he had finished installing the front and moved on to the more challenging side, needing to cut the panels to size before fixing them in place. Satisfied with his work, Ray felt very pleased, but he still had one task left: processing the coyote he had killed the day before. He skinned the coyote, knowing its pelt could sell for $200, although this one was heavily damaged and would likely fetch less. However, for Ray, this was sufficient as the ranch owner would give him a generous bonus. He loved his job and preferred the quiet mountain life to the city's hustle, finding deep satisfaction in it. His mission completed, Ray planned to return home the next day. In Montana's Tobacco Mountains, Jake is a lion hunter responsible for driving away mountain lions that threaten ranches. After a heavy snowfall, the challenges posed by mountain lions intensified, making it essential for the hunting dogs to give their all. To cope with the thick snow, Jake came prepared, bringing his snowmobile from home and attaching a sled to it. He also moved the dog kennels onto the sled to allow the dogs more rest and cover more area. Now, Jake headed towards the active area of the mountain lion. After some time, he stopped upon spotting a lion's footprint in the snow, which he identified as from the previous night. The lion had sheltered overnight in an abandoned mine and left early in the morning in that direction. It was time for the hunting dogs, as the scent of the mountain lion filled the air. Upon release, they eagerly rushed out, sprinting in one direction, while Jake continued on the main road on his snowmobile. As he moved into more remote areas, the snow deepened, forcing Jake to stop. He detached the sled, leaving it behind, and proceeded alone on the snowmobile. The snow's thickness exceeded expectations as he ascended the steep slope, causing the snowmobile to get stuck. Amidst his frustration, he heard the dogs barking urgently. They had cornered the mountain lion. Using his GPS, he found they were on the other side of the ridge. Ignoring the snowmobile, Jake set out on foot. Approaching a dangerous situation, Jake knew the cornered lion, especially being young, could pose a significant risk to the dogs. Upon reaching the site, he found several dogs surrounding a tree with a young mountain lion perched above, intently watching. The lion, still honing its hunting skills, had targeted easier prey, leading to this chase. Believing it was in hostile territory, the lion likely learned a lesson and would hesitate to descend the mountain soon. As Jake prepared to leave with the dogs, the young lion impulsively fled, prompting another chase. Fortunately, the pursuit lasted only about 200 yards before the lion climbed another tree. This time, Jake managed to control the dogs, ending the day's task. They returned to the snowmobile, where Jake cleared the surrounding snow and eventually freed the vehicle. The rest of the journey went smoothly, and they reached the sled. After reassembling it, Jake loaded the dogs into their kennels and headed back to the truck, ready to enjoy his dinner after a fulfilling day. This is a beautiful deer, violently dragged by a man who then uses a small knife to cut open its belly and reaches inside, digging around. This horrifying scene occurred in Montana's Salish Mountains. Paul, a hunter who relies on hunting to make a living, got up early before dawn, grabbed his equipment, and headed deep into the mountains. With daylight being short in the winter, he needed to make the most of every moment. It wasn't long before he reached his destination and continued on foot, Paul's target was a 2-year-old buck, mature yet tender and with an exceptional taste. Deer tracks were everywhere in the snow, a very good sign. Below was a fertile valley, an active area for white-tailed deer, especially during the mating season when they naturally gather. This meant bucks were likely present in the valley. Paul had been hunting deer since he was just 11 years old, an experience that left an indelible memory and made him fall in love with this lifestyle. As he advanced, he suddenly stopped at some strange patterns in the snow, traces left by an eagle during a hunt, with some grouse feathers nearby. This is the harsh reality of nature, where killings happen daily. After reflecting on this, he continued searching for deer. After traveling some distance, he stopped again at the sight of blood in the snow, deducing it came from a deer with drag marks nearby. He immediately followed the trail through a dense pine forest, moving slowly and alert for any sudden appearance of wild animals. Fortunately, his concerns were unnecessary. He found a deer, half-eaten, in the bushes. The clues suggested a lynx was the predator, which hunts by leaping onto a deer's back, locking its neck with its claws, and biting its carotid artery, a very efficient method that suffocates the prey within minutes. Seeing such a formidable competitor spurred the competitive Paul. Hungry and eager, he eventually spotted a deer through his binoculars, but it was a doe, and not what he was looking for. However, during mating season, the presence of a doe meant a buck would be nearby. Paul just needed to tap into the animal's instincts. Bucks become very aggressive as they fight for a mate, so Paul hid behind a tree, took out 2 antlers, and started clashing them together, simulating the sound of bucks fighting. Any nearby buck hearing this noise would likely come to join the battle for the doe. It wasn't long before some rustling came from the bushes across the way. It might have been a dollar. Paul immediately approached. He crouched behind a tree and looked closely. It indeed was a buck. He couldn't miss this opportunity. Just as he was about to shoot, the buck moved behind a tree. Paul quickly changed positions, but still couldn't find a clear shot. So he moved rapidly to another tree. This time, he could see the buck, and it had just stopped. In a swift moment, Paul pulled the trigger. Although the buck ran, he was certain his shot had hit the target. He walked over with confidence and, sure enough, found the buck not far away, motionless. After admiring it briefly, Paul dragged the deer to an open area, then gutted it and removed the perishable organs. Afterward, he returned for his snowmobile, loaded the deer onto the sled, and set off back home, his spirits high. This season was off to a perfect start. In Idaho's Sawtooth Mountains, when the first snow falls, the 10,000-foot peaks become extraordinarily dangerous. But Harry and Gideon, who grew up here, are as comfortable in this harsh nature as fish in water. Today, they received an order. A customer had a remote ranch in the mountains, inaccessible by car, reachable only by horse or plane. Their task was simple: get there and create a makeshift airstrip. It was said there used to be an airstrip, but it had been abandoned for 10 years. The exact situation would only be clear upon arrival. However, the steep mountain roads were beyond imagination. A slight misstep could cause irreparable damage. The two kept a constant watch and chose the safest route. As they traveled, an eagle soared overhead, perfectly embodying the isolation of the mountains. With great effort, they finally reached the ranch. The area was overgrown with weeds, making it hard to discern where the old airstrip was. However, an old plow was on the grass, presumably for clearing the runway. Gideon inspected it and felt it could still be used. Today, the main labor was 2 draft horses. After attaching the equipment and connecting them to the plow, the 2 men sat on the cart, one in front and the other behind. At a command, the horses began to move. Once it was confirmed the wheels could turn normally, Harry lowered a metal blade, achieving an instant snow-clearing effect. The airstrip needed to be over 300 meters long and sufficiently clean and smooth to ensure the safe landing of small aircraft. The ground was frozen and hard, and the uneven spots added much resistance, making it tough for the horses. Harry suddenly yelled a few times, urging the horses to stop quickly because the plow's wheel was about to come off. Upon inspection, they found that a gear fixing the axle had dislocated. Harry resecured the part, and they continued working. After a busy period, the runway was cleared of snow, but the job wasn't done yet. They used tools to fill in small holes, eliminating any hazards. Now the runway work was complete. They used the radio to inform the client. Shortly after, a plane appeared on the horizon. The first supply shipment had arrived. The plane landed smoothly on the runway and came to a steady stop after a short run. After greetings, they helped unload the supplies. The client expressed gratitude to them once again. Now they could head home.